Hello and welcome. A few months ago, David Samus, co-curator of the Window Gallery at the Center for New Music, invited me to guest curate an exhibition of instruments built by past and present Mills College faculty, and the rest, as they say, is history. The current exhibition is indeed a snapshot of history, representing some, just some, not all, of the interesting instrument building endeavors of Mills faculty. The show is by no means comprehensive, as there are many wonderful instrument builders not represented in the show, but it would be impossible to include all of them in our little gallery. The history of Mills College as a hotbed of revolutionary musical experimentation goes back to Harry Partch working with students at Mills in the 1950s. Also, devices built at the Tape Music Center in the 60s and 70s, and Lou Harrison building gamelons in the 1980s, as well as many other interesting creative projects over the years. All of this leads up to more recent years in which the inestimable Daniel Schmidt, at the request of Maggi Payne, began teaching an instrument building class at Mills College somewhere around 2005. I'm not sure how many other universities offer instrument building as part of their music program, but I imagine there aren't many in the country. So there you have it. Mills College is a very special place for instrument builders and the creators of experimental music, and I'm proud to be part of that tradition, and very pleased to share with you tonight, direct from the builders themselves, some background on the instruments featured in the current Window Gallery show. Thanks for coming.
Well, the instrument that's in the show is not a performance instrument. It was made for composing. And so it has a much wider range so that I could play parts, a number of parts on it. Sometimes I would get my wife or someone to play also on it with me so that I could hear what I was composing. So it's not, it's interesting because I've made so many instruments for performance where the voicing goes from bottom to top and it's fairly consistent, which is a trick. It's taken me years to really get that working well, and but that instrument can't do that. Um, it actually, the upper two octaves are pretty good, but then the lower octave wouldn't. I couldn't make it to work with the same melody. So therefore, what I ended up with is basically two instruments pasted together. Um, but it worked fine for composition because I could use a different mallet on the lower half than on the upper half. And so I could play with two hands, I could play two parts, and the, and the difference of the timbre on the lower end was purposeful. I did that so that it would be, so I could have a different voice for that other part. And so that's how that instrument came about. Kind of like just stumbling into something that really worked. I just made it for myself. And so there it is. It's actually quite a nice instrument. I made an instrument that I could carry on an airplane in a carry-on bag. This was a while ago. My sister had a terminal illness, and she was sick and in hospice for well over a year. So when I went to see her, I liked to take an instrument and I would write songs or take songs out of my past, and I would sing them for her while I was there. So I made an instrument that I could play with while I was singing. And so in order to make it work, to be able to go in my suitcase, I abandoned my usual design of instruments completely, and because so I put all the aluminum bars on a string, on two strings, and so they could be rolled up and tucked in the bottom of the bag. And then the frame came apart with bolts, and it would then I could, then it was short enough to go in the bag. And so, but out of that, there was this marvelous acoustic breakthrough. Yeah, I tossed off the aluminum keys, not using my old formulas at all, and that instrument now has really changed the direction of my work. And it's so the instrument that's on display is the upper part of that is taken from the design that I did for the portable instrument. The portable instrument works so well, and so if I lift the top off of that instrument that's on display, I have basically the same instrument that I built for my suitcase. I get the same timbre on the top two octaves. The bottom octave, as I said before, doesn't even work when you take the top off. But, so that was a turning point in my work. I primarily build performance instruments. And so that those two instruments, the display one and my portable instrument, resulted in a real change in how I approach the structure of the instruments and how I make the keys, and because I can get a much better sound out of those two instruments. And so in terms of a performance instrument, a really good performance instrument, that's the direction that I like to go. And I started rebuilding instruments that I made in the past, where before my breakthrough, and replacing those with instruments that are built in this new direction. And I just keep progressing down that road, and I will continue to until I stop making instruments, because I love that, you take 10 steps out into the wilderness, and then you see what you've got, and you take some improvements that you've made, and but this thing of, it's kind of like exploring a new continent, and just these, you suddenly see things, and you pick up on them, and you put them into your repertoire, and then you move on from there.
Sorry, the pieces that are in the show, the body mics is somehow relates to a lot of the work I'm doing that kind of involves obviously bodies, gestures, and this kind of a bit of a personification of technology. So this was a half a joke, half serious, in the sense that the vulva mic and the hand mic were part of a 5 body parts, that a piece that I did with Jacqueline Kiyomi Gork. And the idea was that as I swipe, the body part sounds emerge. So it was this idea of burying sounds, or does the land can speak sounds that have been buried. So it was somehow relating to wars at this point, even though the shapes are kind of exaggerated. It still had this kind of resonance with this idea of bodies and mass graves, and it's not funny at all. But so that was it. And the other piece, Paper Bag, was a collaboration with Nick Bertoni, and Bags is a very huge show that we did, huge as far as like technology for us. And also it's again this idea of domestic objects or personal objects that some kind of become magical or start speaking of other lives than the life of the object itself. Flycatcher, the score, that's a bit of a fantasy. I don't do I don't write scores, I don't make scores. So it's because of this kind of dead fly is how I kind of thought about scores. So as mentioned, first, this use of technology and embedding it into familiar object or domestic objects, or somehow creating a parallel life of the objects is something that I think I've been interested with. The ladies' gloves has already this idea of first as a kitchen glove, something that we use, and taking it further. And so these pieces that I'm showing kind of inscribe themselves to this idea of technology and the female body more specifically. And I think that the bag, which obviously relates to the handbag. In this case, it's a paper bag. And we did this collaboration with Nick Bertoni, who was this incredible inventor and community organizer and the most curious type and savant, as far as his grasp of technology and his irreverence for technology. And this collaboration was I was extremely lucky to collaborate with him. And in this case, it was for New Langton Arts. We had a lot of different bags. My bags were a bit more, obviously, precious and smaller, and his bags were army bags and golf bags. And I mean, it's not like we that his and hers, but it turns out that we combined our interests in this idea of what you carry and how you carry it. And it involved a community. I think, Sudhu, you were some part of that community. And so we created these families of bags which would exude stories as they were being agitated by people's proximity. It was really beautiful show. We were a bit burnt out when it was finished, so unfortunately we didn't show it again, but it would be great to show it again somehow, unfortunately without Nick.
Okay, so in the context of this Mills show that we've just done, please describe your work appearing in the show and give us a bit of insight into the thinking behind it.
Well, it's an instrument, the prototype of which I originally made in 1980 or 81, at a time when I had recently moved to New York and was in touch with a whole group of improvisers new to me, like Bob Ostertag and John Zorn and Leslie Delaba and others. And it was kind of stretching me in certain ways because everything was so fast. And it seemed to be very reactive and fast kind of music that I was getting into. And I decided the guitar was less and less relevant as an instrument to what I was trying to do. And I ended up thinking, well, in effect what I'm using of the guitar is simply the fact that it's a string stretched over a piece of wood. So why don't I just get a piece of wood and stretch some strings over it and see what happens? And that's kind of what I did, and I was limited by what was available to me because I'm not a craftsman or an inventor or an instrument builder or anything like that. This was a pragmatic decision based on the kind of music I was being pushed into somehow. And so I had these guitar pickups. The strings had to be spaced in such a way that they would fit over the guitar pickups. There are 6 of them. So from that point of view, it is related to a guitar simply because that's what was available from the point of view of building it. So I built that, and the bridge is in the middle, and a pickup on either side of the bridge. So you effectively have kind of 2 sounding parts coming out of it. And it led to a whole bunch of other things. More and more designed for me to be actually very extreme. I was hoping that this would be something where I knew I wouldn't want to do it to a guitar, but I could do it to this, like drill a hole in it, or bang a nail into it, or wield a chainsaw to it, or whatever, whatever gesture I wanted to make, I would no longer be paranoid about damaging the instrument. The instrument was built for that. And so I did those things. And what kind of surprised me about it was that the original instrument retained a quality of lyricism and delicacy, which was absolutely not at all what I had in mind. And over the years, I it kept on coming back. And even though I went back to the guitar in about 1984, that instrument found its way back into other projects. So I built new versions of it. Friends asked for it, or I was doing a project with the Ensemble Moderne, and they snuck it away and had their instrument designer build a couple of replicas that they have in their store and stuff like that. So I have gotten back into using it, and now I embrace the lyricism and the delicacy of it, and that's what the instrument is for me. It's no longer something that I want to bang a nail into. There are other instruments I can do that with, but this one, it kind of turned into this thing, and it's got a tuning, and it's kind of become an instrument which I've learned, like you learn any instrument, with techniques and so on. So it's dear to my heart.
Fantastic. You sort of went into this a little bit at the end of that answer there, but the second question of two was, please give us a sense of how this work relates to the larger body of your work, and feel free to tell us anything else that might be significant, such as collaborators involved, etc.
Well, it relates to the larger body of my work in as much as it's me doing it. That's pretty much it. I use it as an improviser mostly. It came out of the practice of improvisation with people, and it particularly came out of practice with Bob Ostertag initially. It seemed to fit very well with his instrument, which was mostly sample based in the very early days of that, before that's what it was called. We made a record called Voice of America with Phil Minton. Must have been about 1981. So, and I have records of a bunch of concerts that I did with Zorn or Ostertag, where I was using that instrument as a vehicle for improvisation. And then years later, I met this guy, Sudhu Tewari, and he kind of pushed a couple of buttons which led me back into the idea that making instruments could be kind of interesting again. And so we started a group called Normal, and that's what we've been doing ever since. And we're about to make a record, and we did a big show here not that long ago. So there you go. The interesting part for me is that this instrument has actually shifted a little bit away from the improvisation world and become something I like to use in certain specific contexts, especially film music. And it's found its way into a bunch of different soundtracks because it has this particular sound which is not like any other sound. You don't know what it is when you hear it, and that's something which is interesting in a film soundtrack. It helps to create a certain kind of magic.
In 2001, Paul DeMarinis became the first David Tudor composer in residence at Mills College. As part of this residency, he was to engage students and also faculty and staff. And he brought everyone together in the concert hall and made this incredible speech, which posited that all the sounds that had ever occurred in the concert hall, all the people talking, all the performances, everything, were still somehow captured and held in the walls and the ceiling and the floor of that space. So he told people to go listen to the CDs that I had made of performances in that space. I had, at that point, used the CCM tape archive to to make, I think there's about 120 CDs with materials available for students to listen to. And so people were supposed to, listen and figure out which performances or activities or whatever resonated with them, and then to build an installation around that. And these installations were to go, very Tudoresque way throughout the building. So, and outdoors, in the front of the building, in the back of the building, and all around the grounds. And it turned out to be an amazing performance, I have to say. So people were required to gain permission from the copyright holders or the composers, and they all did. So they all got their written permissions in, and off it went. So my participation in this event was that I selected 3 works from that archive, and one was Paul de Marinas with John Bischoff and Mark Greff using the Moog synthesizer to create the Star Spangled Banner, and it was amazing. It was way over the top and really fun. And the second one was Jim Pomeroy, this amazing performance artist. And the third one was a performance by David Behrman in the concert hall, where I played flute. So I took those as resources and processed them beyond recognition, which is what I tend to do, and burned a CD of that piece, which is called Past Presence. And then I used a little CD player on repeat mode, so it was continuously going. And I took the audio leads out from that CD player and made a little circuit to drive 2 piezo pickups. So one piezo pickup was attached to a CD without any information on it, and on the left, and then another one to the right. So I made these CDs become like little headphones, right? So I was driving the piezos, and those in turn coupled with the CDs. So in order to sort of have people come experience it, I had a coat hanger to attach it to a surface above, and then I had the arms come down, and then the 2 CDs were placed on either side, sort of suspended. And so people would come in and they would put their ears into it and listen to it. So this was really fun to do. But I also sort of dressed up the coat hanger with a series of flasher LEDs. So you have these 2 arms just flashing little red LEDs up and down to draw attention to the installation. So this was placed in the foyer, and it was placed in a very small window that just gave you enough room to move in and out. So, yeah, that's about it. Okay, thank you and goodbye.
I'm Chris Brown. I'm going to be talking about the 2 instruments that I have in this show. Both of them were made as part of my activities with Confluence, which was a group of composers in the early 1980s working in San Francisco. Tom Nunn was one of them, who is currently still active as a composer and instrument builder in San Francisco, and David Poirot is the other member, who is now in LA. And the aesthetic of Confluence was that we decided that all of the music we would make together as a collective would be improvised using only instruments that we had made ourselves. And we worked together between 1980 and about 1982 and developed a lot of different instruments while sharing a studio. So we shared a lot of ideas and made different versions of some of the, or sort of variations on some of the same ideas about building instruments. And most of them were involved amplification of materials of different kinds. And we were definitely sharing similar approaches and then coming up with different versions of them in our instruments. And the instrument that I will talk about first is the hot lunch. And I'm going to produce a little sound from that so that you can hear it as I talk. The hot lunch was the type of an instrument that we often called a punctuator. It made short, noisy sounds suitable for punctuating phrases. And basically, most of the sounds were made with friction, using your hands to create friction sounds on different percussion instruments. And the hot lunch was a lap-held viola, so I added strings to that concept. It's perhaps influenced by Harry Partch's adapted viola. It had a curved birch neck and body, a fingerboard made from plastic piano ivory material, 4 steel strings stretched over a viola bridge, and a soundboard attached below, made from a pink lunch tray. A piezo pickup is glued to the lunch tray, leading to a phone jack built into the body. And glued to the lunch tray are various objects for friction rubbing noises, but also some other odds and ends, plastic penguin wind-up toy, and a metal spring doorstop played by plucking or bowing the strings on either side of the bridge while interspersing tones with the strings and the noises. This was one of my main instruments in performing with Confluence, but I eventually realized that it required a greater effort on my part to learn to play string instruments than I was really willing to commit to.
Hi, I'm Wendy Reid. This is Lulu, and I'm going to be talking about the birdcage, Lulu, and tree pieces. First of all, I'd like to thank David, Sudhu, and Bart of the Window Gallery for having this exhibit, and Brent of Center for New Music. In 1990, when David Rosenboom was on his way to CalArts, he gave me the opportunity to teach the composition classes that fall. That was the first time I taught at Mills. But even before then, I was a graduate student in the late 70s, and I discovered that Mills was this wonderful place of experimentation and exploration, as well as a great place to meet unusual musicians and composers. When I was there, I studied with Terry Riley, Robert Ashley, Charles Shear, Pandit Pranath, and I actually did my first LP with Willie Wynant. The cage itself isn't your usual musical instrument, but it does have some musical instruments inside of it. But even more importantly, it has an incredible musician inside, Lulu, my African gray parrot. And Lulu has become a musical partner with me for 16 years. I improvise with her almost every day. And she not only affects my composition, I kind of think of her as a co-composer at this point. I also think that I'm part bird, she's part human, or I'm part Lulu and she's part Wendy. I usually, when I improvise with her, it's usually for fun and I don't do too much, but sometimes I'll transcribe the interaction that we have or record it. And eventually that would probably turn into a tree piece. For me, this musical process has been and continues to be not only a method of composition, but a way of life. Along with the cage in this exhibit is the Lulu Variation score, which was performed at Other Minds 19. This was produced by Charles Armacanian. Tom Dambley was one of the performers, Lulu, and me. The cage was actually made for the performance by Edward Morris, and the score is one of my tree pieces, which is written in which I refer to as tree notation. If you look at the score, it's this long, narrow strip. Looks like a tree skeleton, and it is read from bottom to top, left to right. It is also a visual as well as oral representation of the Fibonacci series. What's good about the notation is that not only being tree-like, it gives an immediate view of the overall structure of the piece. Or I started to compose them in 1980, and I describe them as an ongoing set of musical processes which attempt to reflect nature's manner of operation and to ultimately reflect the interconnection of all things in nature. In performance, an attempt is made at a spontaneous, unforced, and unblocked growing of sound and silence, in which emphasis is placed on formation rather than pre-established form, as in the building and shaping of cell-like units and living processes. So all the tree pieces are related to nature in some way. They all have this silence and sound exploration. The most important thing of all, though, is that what they have in common is this interconnection of all things. Anyway, so that I'll stop there, and Lulu and I will say goodnight. And thanks for listening.
I was curious, maybe this is a question to happen at the end of this discussion, but did the hub turn out, your hopes for it turn out the way that you wanted? The hub box, the idea of introducing a standard way of interconnecting, which was different than the ad hoc way the league interconnected machines.
Oh yeah, I would say so, very much so. I mean, yeah, because what we were doing before that, I mean, we were already into this idea of interconnecting computers to make music, but it was all done in a kind of crazy improvised way with those proto board things and wires going around and hooking this to that and hooking this, you know, things just ad hoc. And it would take a long time to set up before we could start playing.
Right.
So when we got the idea that we wanted to have this be kind of a, the idea that you could take your standard computer serial output and plug into something, and that we could make a way that we could do that quickly when we would get together, and that people could come and go. We weren't thinking at the time either of it being a fixed membership band, but the idea was like, well, there'll be a whole scene of people that have serial ports on their computers and will want to hook in for
Right.
different situations and so on.
Right.
So this particular version of the hub had a new capability that had come along that we hadn't really thought of originally, was that we ended up having this kind of group of 6 people. We wanted to do it with 6 people, and we wanted to do it, on the suggestion from Nick Collins that we do it simultaneously in 2 different places. So that ended up supporting 3 users in each place, and then some way of, doing communication over the phone lines with it.
Sorry, the Silver Hub is one of 2 hubs that we built
Right.
for that.
Yeah.
Right.
But the idea was to build. The first thing was to build this thing that had 4 connects, but it was the fact that we ended up getting this idea of being 6 of us in 2 places. So we built a second hub that we realized we could do that without building a different hardware design. We could just build 2 of those and then dedicate one of the serial ports to be going through the phone line to interconnect, and write new software to make a kind of mirror of one hub mirror each other, across the phone line.
So that's another, I mean, those RS-232 connectors and the serial connectors that's another kind of testament to the generality of the instrument as opposed to the idiosyncratic nature of the lead connections. It's like you could use the same connector for individuals to connect to play and also to connect to the phone lines.
Right.
Right.
Because even when we had first built the first one, we weren't even thinking of that application of having 2
Right.
moving to 2 different places with it.
Yeah.
But it
And then when we
adapted to that.
and then when we played locally, we would just connect them with a straight line instead of connecting them over the phone lines, and we had 6
Right.
people connected together in one space. And do you guys remember what happened the very first time we connected them together in Tim's house?
No.
No,
They pretty much blew up.
No, I don't remember.
Yeah.
Really? Like smoking and stuff?
We had one of the Sims in his one room and one in the other room. And apparently there was different ground levels between them. And as soon as we hooked them together, there was a giant snap and that awful smell. And
Oh, man.
Did you have to replace all the ICs?
we had to replace the ports. Yeah, the ports had big craters taken out of them.
God, I'm amazed. I mean, I forgot that. Well,
I forgot.
That was
I
the
think
very first moment of connection.
that's how it goes. I was thinking that for me, the most interesting thing about that era was that it allowed us to share data with each other, but it was all in this kind of slosh, way that basically, because we were writing to places in our own machine, and then it took, what was it, a second and a half or something to go over to the other machine, and everything was so slow that there was no synchronicity. There was really no ability to synchronize, events in time. And that, at the time, it seemed like, well, that's all we can do, but it actually had its own musical, character that is in the work around that time,
It was a weird kind of, it was a plus and a minus. It was like compared to the league, it was a much higher data bandwidth, but much slower. So it was,
So it wasn't like MIDI where each event in MIDI actually is kind of a musical event that happens at a certain time.
Yeah.
Right.
It was kind of a shared memory space that had a very slow update. And we would just be saying, "Oh, I'm telling you that a while ago I played this little melody.
Yeah.
A while ago I sent John this message."
It was a little more contemplative that way, I think. And I remember the first time we hooked up to Scott's MIDI box, the opcode box, I was kind of shocked, and I kind of felt, well, do we really want to do that? That sounds so, too controlled and controlling, you know?
Yeah.
Certainly led to a different kind of music. And
It did.
Yeah, it changed the music quite a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of were playing in the infinite now.
Yeah.
It was a little bit blurry. That's what
It was blurry. Yeah.
So that kind of answer that sort of question that Sudhu had asked about something about, well, how did, I mean, it was the realization of what we were really interested in at the time, so it really was the reason why we had to do it rather than use any kind of existing technology, is that there was no existing technology to do that. And we didn't know enough about real computer state of the art in a way,
Nor could we afford it.
Nor we could have, right. So it was definitely.
We had between the two locations, there were the MIDI boys and then you guys who were playing still the old analog equipment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, right.
That's right.
Kind of like a social hierarchy that was also fit into the.
I objected to the MIDI boy label because I was playing raw sound waves on my Amiga, but
God, I forgot about that a little bit.
I forgot too.
But
I think that was the first time that I actually used a Mac Plus instead of using, basically, I was using an AIM at the very beginning.
Oh, yeah, right.
Oh, right. With
Yeah.
a thermal printer on it or something.
With the little, it had its little printer on it.
and a
And
full
working
ASCII
for it?
keyboard.
it had a keyboard. That was pretty advanced.
Yeah.
But sort of the way the whole machine looked, the little box, I thought we ought to kind of just mention that, kind of maybe younger people don't know this, but that was kind of, if you were building electronics, that was just kind of a generic way you would do it. I mean, you go down to the store and you get one of those silver box kind of things. And, if people are building a TV set or people are building, that's the way kind of like even the commercial electronics was built, with some kind of metal chassis with a bunch of soldering going on underneath it, or tubes sticking up, or, just kind of that's just a generic way to build one-off electronic things in those days.
Yeah.
So.
It's an interesting contrast. The glass hub was also, I don't know, it was Paul DeMarinis and David Behrman that kind of got into that.
They were, I think they were the first
Plexiglass.
ones to put plexiglass
Yeah,
on
that
it.
was a cool thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So there were two totally different homebrew approaches there, but they're both special in their own way.
Yeah, or people would use wood. I know Jim had a wood sandwich.
Danish
It was
modern.
a clear plastic one. His was made out of wood. Like two sheets of wood.
He had Doug Hollis fashion that for him.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
like a sculptor guy.